The term post-traumatic growth is not that new. It was first published back in 1996. Rich Tedeschi was a graduate student who was told by his mentor that he needed to go sit in on some groups with bereaved parents, which he was very reluctant to do, thought he had nothing to offer and that it would be miserable and depressing. But he found that in sitting in with them, there was a theme. There was a population of people who were just doing miserably, of course. And then there was a population of parents who, despite the loss of their child, had somehow transmuted that loss into something positive. And so he found that very interesting. By something positive, I mean, even though the parent, of course, would have moved heaven and earth to have their child returned to them, that was not an option. But they would, for instance, there's one family, their son loved playing baseball. And so they founded a nonprofit and started buying property and setting up baseball fields all around inner cities where kids who otherwise would not be able to play baseball could. So those sorts of things he wanted to study. And he looked around for other information about post-traumatic growth and fell upon the experience of the men returning from the Hanoi Hilton. That was the prison in which American aviators who had been shot down and bailed out over North Vietnam were incarcerated. And there were 591 of them who were in prison there for from 2.5 months to 8.5 years. And when they were about to return home, the doctors and specialists told their families that they could expect that their returning husbands and fathers would be psychotic and infertile, and basically their life as they had known it was over. Now, as it turns out, the rate of post-traumatic stress among veterans returning from Vietnam was about 30%, just regular ground pounders who were in the field. And the expectation was that the rate of that diagnosis among these men would be, in the high 90s. It turned out that the rate was 4%. And this was a mystery, but they studied these men, and they've been studied annually, those who still survive, ever since then. And they, by reconstructing their experience, both while they were imprisoned and after they returned home, they were able to identify these 5 domains of post-traumatic growth. The first here you see personal strength, and that's just the idea that if I've lost my child, if I've been in prison for 7 years and been tortured and starved and so forth, then I really have taken the worst that life can throw at me, and I'm strong enough to deal with anything else that I might encounter. They found that their relationships were improved, they had a much greater capacity for intimate relationships, and had founded relationships that persisted for decades with those with whom they were imprisoned. And they encountered and experienced and addressed spiritual and existential questions that many people who are not traumatized often just float through life without ever really having to question the purpose of their existence or the reason why bad things happen to good people and so forth. They didn't have this option. Well, they had the option, and if those answers were not forthcoming, then unfortunately we do see the results of post-traumatic stress, which can lead to depression and suicide and so forth. But if they are able to address these issues adequately, then there is this opportunity for growth. And then the other is appreciation for life, simple things, and recognizing that the possibilities in life can be unlimited. Now, I mentioned all these things. Of course, post-traumatic growth is not the only kind of growth. We don't have to be traumatized in order to grow. None of us decides to send our children to the worst school in the lousiest neighborhood so they can be traumatized and then grow from it. That would be a stupid idea. It certainly is not the only kind of growth. And indeed, part of my theme for this talk is that the lessons from post-traumatic growth can be generalized to those of us who have not been traumatized. Further, they were able to deconstruct and reconstruct phases in the path of post-traumatic growth. Now, path is not misspelled there. That's actually a program which has been developed. It is the Warrior Progressive and Alternative Training for Healing Heroes, which is, you can Google it. It's online. They've got a website. It's a great program. I've taught there a number of times. And they have identified these 5 phases, which tend to facilitate post-traumatic growth. Time constrains me from going into any of them in detail, except that second one, which I have emboldened and underlined, which is regulation, which is where meditation practices, and specifically we'll be talking about TM, where that fits into this model. Once again, I'll reiterate that you can have growth without trauma, and you can have post-traumatic growth without TM. That is just the nature of being human. We can grow from trauma. But what we try to do in this program in the Warrior Path is stack the deck and try to make it as easy as possible to succeed in post-traumatic growth.